Like in any group, it is important to begin caring dads by establishing ground rules for confidentiality and respect, and practical rules around attendance and punctuality. With this group, it can be efficient to present the rules and then allow for comment. Alternately, facilitators can use the group to develop these rules. This exercise should also help men transition from focusing on their concerns about being in this program to focusing on material to be presented. Use your judgment about the degree of flexibility with rules. Most of the time, men have no problem. However, it's useful to engage them in a discussion of their agreement and disagreement with the rules and give them some control over the process. For example, in past groups, modifications have been made to rules regarding lateness, and accommodations have been made for harm reduction plans around drug and alcohol use. Now we're going to talk about the exercise, What is a Dad? Introduce this exercise by having men consider what it means to be a father. Take a piece of full scrap and get ready for a brainstorm. First, you're going to have men generate descriptions for a good or a great dad. Likely, the resulting description will be of a fairly ideal father. After that's done, have men just consider the description of somebody who is just a dad. Encourage them to come up with behaviors of a father who's good enough, but not necessarily the best dad. Facilitators are encouraged to gently prod men to provide examples from their own lives or from the lives of others of both good fathering and just a dad. This exercise will help identify a range of acceptable fathering behaviors for men and helps to keep the idea of good enough fathering within reach. Next, introduce men to the idea that fathers who fit into the just a dad and a good dad category both maintain an important contract with their children. That contract is one that holds that a father is someone who the child can trust to love them, to be there for them, and to keep them safe. Ideally, children don't even question the basics of their relationship with their father. Unfortunately, sometimes fathers break this contract with their children. Things that break this contract are events that stay with a child and have an impact on their behavior, their character, and development, often over a long period of time. Explain to men that we're now going to generate a list of these deal breakers, or actions that damage a father's relationship with his children, ways that fathers can break the contract of trust between them and their children. Allay men's anxiety by letting them know that our first job in caring dads is going to be to focus on the just a dad and good dad lists, but it's important to keep in mind the ways in which fathers can break this contract between them and their children. These lists are going to become an important reference throughout the group and should remain a living document. In addition, the good dad and the just a dad list serves as a document containing both the goals and alternatives to abusive parenting behaviors. These lists should be posted every week in the group room. Now, we're going to watch a video demonstration of this exercise. I want you to watch for a few things in this video. One of the things I want you to watch for is the way in which Tib models respect for the men, how he responds non-defensively to men's challenging and resistant behavior, how he helps men move from general descriptions to specific behaviors, how he avoids confrontation, and how he starts to develop discrepancy between what men want and what their actions might be. Encourage men to give feedback to each other.
Okay, now that we've established some group rules to make us feel comfortable being here, what I want to do is really begin to talk about what we're actually here to do. And we're here to talk about being a dad and being as good a dad as we can be, and to learn as much as we can about ourselves as a dad. So starting with that, what I want to do is get from you guys your idea of what are the characteristics of a great dad. When you think about a great dad, what are the characteristics? And I'm going to write this stuff down for us here, okay? So we're just going to spitball this, throw out stuff that when you imagine what a great dad would be like, what comes to mind? Yeah?
Make money.
Makes money. Okay?
Plays with kids.
Plays with kids. What other things come to mind?
Positive influence.
Yeah, okay, so like what would that look like, a positive influence? Because I
Uh,
think you're right, but I just want to
Yeah.
know specific.
No,
Yeah.
just, being showing your kid how to treat others how you want to be treated.
Okay, right. So, can I just say with respect? So you're showing your kids how to be respectful of other people. Yeah, absolutely. So what kind of thing would that look like? If I'm showing somebody how to be respectful, you don't have to, I mean, anyone can answer that. When we think about, when we want to be a good role model for our kids and show them how to respect other people, what kind of gesture would that look like? Anybody have an example of what that would be?
I truly believe in teaching kids manners,
Okay.
principles,
Yeah.
things that will help them
Okay.
as they grow.
So what would an example of a kind of a manner you would want to teach?
Well, please, thank you, call adults, Mr. and Mrs., first name, that sort of thing.
For sure.
Really.
Okay.
Teach
So that's
manners.
important,
Yeah.
and that's something a great dad would do with their kids.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Is that what you were thinking about as well?
Yeah, it falls into the same.
Yeah.
It falls into what I was saying. There.
Sure. Okay. Do you have any specific thing you had in mind?
I don't know. Just,
It's okay if you can.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't want you to
no,
feel pressured.
The respect, right? So
Yeah.
it falls under respect to, treat somebody like I said earlier, treat
Yeah.
somebody the way you want to be treated.
Sure.
Don't go out of your way to hurt somebody.
Okay. So don't be hurtful.
Yeah, don't be hurtful.
Okay. All right. That's a good one. So those are things that are great, Dad. Anyone have anything else they'd like to add on to this? Yeah.
I think it's important for them to respect the parents only too.
Only their parents?
Parents too.
Oh, as well. So
Yes.
their parents, right? So how do you teach a child to respect their parents?
They listen to it, tell them.
So they listen and do what you tell them to do. So that demonstrates that they're respecting you. But how do you teach that to somebody? What are some of the ways that we learned to respect when we were either growing up or in our adult life? What are ways that we learned to respect someone? Because as I said, what you've identified is your children showing you respect. But how do you teach that to somebody? That's a bit harder, isn't it?
I have to respect my dad, because if I didn't, he'd cut me on his.
Well, that's a really good comment, and I think if you're okay, can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
So, what is the difference between fear and respect? Because what it sounds like you were talking about is you're afraid if you didn't do, that your dad would hurt you. Is respect and fear the same thing, or are they different? What do we think?
In my household, it was one and the same,
Yeah.
I'm not saying I had a bad dad,
No.
I love my dad.
Yeah.
But, don't piss him off.
Yeah. So that was so when I talk about fear, that there's a bit of that in there, right? Because I don't want Dad to be upset. I don't want Dad to be angry. So I will do what he wants me to do out of that rather than, well, what's the difference? So then talk to me about what respect actually means. Yeah.
Well, if you want your kids to listen to what you're saying,
Yeah?
do what you're saying, you show them the same back. You show them what respect is by respecting this is what they're saying and what they want. Hear what they're doing. I think. Do you know what I mean?
I'm getting what you're
You
talking
know?
about. So what about others, right? So you have to demonstrate respect through your own behavior. Otherwise, what you have to do is instill respect through fear. So what do you think, if you're going to be a great dad, someone who your kids not only respect but love and turn to for affection and support, does it need to be fear-based, or should it be, I'm respecting my dad because I believe that my dad has both my best interest at heart and that he does the right things and he shows me how to treat people, right? Because that's what you are all about. So So how do we actually teach that? Because that's one of the hardest things, and it's one of the most common things that dads talk about is respect. But it's really hard to teach it, right? Without actually showing how to be respectful. So we talked about that as one of our rules, is respect. And so we try to figure out how to be respectful of each other in the group. So we talked about no judgment, no yelling, those kinds of things. And listening and hearing people out on what they have to say allows for people to feel both respected and included. So that's a challenge, right? For as a dad or as a mom or any parent, it's figuring out how do I best teach my children what you've just said, that golden rule, right? Do unto others as we would have done unto us. That's about respect. So how do I teach that? And you're right, it's about showing them respect. So it's finding ways of doing that, because I think you're right, that's a really good goal, is for our children to learn respect. And so what we have to wrestle with as dads is, do we teach it through fear or do we teach it through example? And that's a hard balance to come to. Yeah.
But my father, I have rules to follow, and now I am respectful. I'm a respectful person because my father set the rules, I follow the rules, and you grow up to be more respectful.
Right. So what your father did for you was set boundaries, right?
Yes, I think it's very important to have rules for your children to follow.
Right. So you set boundaries for your kids, and through that, your children learn the kinds of things that are important for you. And so do you enforce those rules by hitting your children or by helping them learn how to live by those rules? And I guess that's the thing we need to kind of struggle with, right? What are we actually getting? So if we have rules and what we're getting is compliance to those rules through fear, of being afraid of being hurt or yelled at or upset our parents, versus respecting the rules because they seem like good rules to live by. So that's the difference, and it's complicated, and I don't think we're going to get all of it here, but I want you to kind of think about that, because that's about how our relationships go in the forward and to the future with our kids, and about how our kids can turn to us in hard times. So I just want you to puzzle with that. Would that be okay for now? Okay. So I want to go on to the next part of the exercise here, which is we're going to come up with a list of good enough dad. Good enough dad. So what are the sort of just good enough things to kind of get by being a dad? When you think about that, what comes to mind? Yeah.
Being there, like when you're done work, going home.
Okay, so is that like just showing up?
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, like I know a lot of my buddies.
Yeah.
They finish work. They're down at the Legion. They're down there
Right.
until like 9 o'clock.
Right.
Not every night, but enough.
So show up, right? Be present in the house. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's fair enough. So that's good enough. Good enough dad is at least present in the house. Is that what?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. People agree with that? Good enough dad is someone who shows up, right? So we already started our list of great dad stuff, right? So a great dad would do more than show up, right?
Yeah, like I'm not saying that you come home right away, you piggyback the kids or anything, but you should at least freaking be there.
They should know who their dad is.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair enough. So good enough dad, the kids know who he is, right? Absolutely. Any other thoughts about good enough? Just getting by, right? Dads are just getting by. What do you think?
I think sometimes the dads can only do what the moms let them do.
So sometimes a dad can only do what a mom lets them do. Sure. Okay. So,
And they know why they be blamed for something that they can't do anyway. So.
right. Okay. So can we talk about that in the next couple of weeks? Come back to some of that stuff around how you're feeling related to your kids. But if we're going to think about a good enough dad, someone who's just getting by, with the exception of what you've just talked about, because you're feeling as though you've got some controls around that, but we can think about a good enough dad as someone who shows up, right? What else do they do? How about kind of knows when the kids were born? Kind of knows when the birthday is, right? Kind of rough idea, right? Doesn't plan the birthday parties, but shows up. Would that be kind of like a good enough, right? So shows up for birthday parties, right? So for important events. Which might kind of tie into some of what you were talking a little bit about in terms of, so either gets permission from mom to show up or knows, or mom reminds them of when stuff is, and they might show up. So perhaps the, Christmas concert at school or field day or some other important event, if he knows about it, then there's a good chance he'll show up, right? That's the kind of, right? So his intentions are good, right? So it's a guy who has an intention there, but doesn't always pay attention to the details with his kids. So perhaps relies more on the other parent to inform him about what's going on, versus this dad might actually pay attention to his kids when they're talking about, we got a concert coming up at school, okay, let me put that in my calendar, versus this guy who may notice it on the family calendar on the way out the door that day, or relies on mom to do that. So that's the difference. So I'm not judging this guy. I'm just saying we want to differentiate kind of between this guy, the sort of 5-star dad over here that nobody ever really is, but the 5-star dad over here, and this guy who just kind of getting by on stuff, right? So he's not absent from the family, but he's not totally invested in it either, because he's thinking of other stuff. Yeah.
Sometimes, as a father, you have to work, you have to make the money, right?
Yep.
So that's why the wife, she can do the birthday party while you work.
Sure, she can do that. What do you think of that?
I agree with that,
Yeah.
I think so.
No, go ahead.
I think I can be a good dad, a great dad. I have to go to work. My wife can do the birthday party. Why am I not why am I a good enough dad when I'm not a great dad? I'm a great dad because I work, I make the
Right.
money.
So when we're talking about this, is this starting to feel like I'm talking about you, making judgments here? Because I'm just trying to make a list here.
Sometimes I'm busy, like I can't. go
Yeah.
to-
So when you're busy, sometimes you're busy and you can't make it to things, do you tell your children, I can't make it? Or do you rely on their mother to say, Dad can't come?
Tell my daughter.
I can't do this. But do you make it to things as well?
Some.
Yes. So when I'm talking about making this list, does that feel like I'm making some judgment of you?
I feel I'm a great dad.
Yeah. Have you heard otherwise?
No. But
Okay.
You just said shows up for important events. I can't make every event. So
Right. But a good enough dad does show up for important events, right? So that's, or maybe shows up for half the important events, right? So that's not about judgment. What we're trying to do is really think about the differences here. And why we're trying to think about the differences in this is because we're trying to, eventually what we're going to do is say, what is it like for our kids? So we're going to get there. But right now, we just want to get some ideas up here on this. So another good enough dad. What is another thing a good enough dad does? What do you think?
Well, it kind of goes back to the respect that maybe shows Jesus kid some respect, how to respect others, but maybe not back it up.
Okay.
Knows, does that make sense?
Yeah, so back it up. Why? How?
You talk about your kid, teaching your kid to show respect to people or someone,
Yeah.
and tell them what they should do, but you don't, you be a hypocrite and you don't back it up. But so being good enough that I don't know. So
Yeah, I think you're onto something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
just I don't want to. Maybe it falls into a different kind of dad, but knows what respect is.
Right.
Knows how to respect somebody. Tells them the kid how to respect somebody,
Right.
but they could be the hypocrite and not.
And not show it.
And not show it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So an example of that might be,
Listen to what your mother says.
Right.
What your mother says.
right?
And I could be there. When you tell me what to do, and I fluff it off.
Okay.
Don't show
So
her
tell your
respect.
kids respect your mother, but don't demonstrate respect of her
Yeah.
so they can see how to respect her. Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough. Right? Absolutely, for sure. Okay. So what I want to do is move on to the next list, which is what we call deal breakers. So what deal breakers are things that hurt our relationship with our kids. So things that we might do that hurt. So I'll give you an example of that, and we'll go back to what you said. So a dad who makes it to some, but a dad who never shows up for important events in their kid's life. What do you think that's like for the kid? Right? Because these are important things, right? So maybe grade 8 grad, right? That's an important thing for kids, or other events in your kid's life if they're involved in, you know, guides or scouts or those kinds of things. And the dad that never shows up, what's that like for the kids?
It would hurt 'em.
It would hurt the kids, right?
Yeah.
So you see what we're trying to do is make a differentiate across this, right? So the dad that never shows up, right, hurts your kids. Is that, do we have some agreement on that if you never show up? Yeah. Never shows up. So when we talk about never showing up, it's out of choice never showing up, right? So they decide not to know or not to be involved or not to show up for stuff. So it's not because something's gotten in the way or there are circumstances they're dealing with, but it's the dad who just chooses never to show up, right? What's the message to our children if we choose never to show up? What do you think?
Don't care.
Don't care. Yeah. And we don't want our kids to think we don't care about them, right? But if you're absent from stuff, right? So I want to go back to yours from over here. What about the dad that just comes in and goes right into the basement, turns on TV and ignores the family,
Well, he's still there.
right?
You know, if they got, they want to talk to him or something, he's still in the house.
Is he? Can you be present and absent at the same time? How? Talk about that.
Well, I mean, I could be sitting on the couch watching a game or something. Kids could be talking to me, and I'm just like, yeah, okay.
So ignoring them?
Ignoring them.
Right.
You know, same.
Sure. So ignoring their needs, right? So when your kids come to you, right, that can break the relationship with your kids. So if it happens once in a while, it's one thing. If it happens consistently, then your kids learn that you're probably not someone they can go and talk to, right? And these are some of the messages that happen with that. So another deal breaker. What about striking our children in anger? Yeah? You don't think so?
Well, I don't know what the circumstances with the other guys are, so, you
Well, just in general, striking our children out of anger, is that,
know, in my books, no, you don't.
you don't do that, right? So hitting. What about calling them names? Like dumbass or stupid or useless or what's that? What do you think that's like for the kids?
Horrible.
Hmm?
Horrible.
Horrible? Yeah. So these are all things that kind of begin to erode. You know, when you talk about wanting to teach kids respect, these are some of the things that begin to erode that respect of you or your relationship with your kids, right? So calling names. Okay, so thanks for helping me build this list. These are things we're going to continue to work on and build on, all of these things. This is our goal. This is what we're all aiming for consistently, right? To be this guy up here. Sometimes we get here, and these are the kinds of things that we're going to start trying to avoid doing, right? So we're going to build these lists more and more as we go over. But for the first night, I think we've done a pretty good job. How are you guys feeling about being here at this? Was this harder or easier or just neutral than you thought it was going to be?
It's gonna be harder than I thought it would be,
It's going to be harder than you thought?
but I see the positives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come through.
Okay. Thanks for sharing. That was probably harder than it seemed, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I still don't know what I got myself into here.
No. And you may never know what you got yourself into, but you know, if you can trust the process a little bit as we go forward, then maybe there's a place for you in here.
Just some final thoughts related to the first week. It's important to try to avoid having men disclose too much personal information during this first group. For example, when brainstorming a list of examples of ways that fathers can break the contract between them and their children, facilitators should generally avoid too much probing. List men's examples with fairly little discussion and prompted personal disclosure. If men provide personal examples, it's a good idea to gently limit that disclosure. Too much personal discussion in the first group may be counterproductive, and it is likely to increase dropout. It's also useful to end the first week with a checkout. In general, facilitators can have men check out with how he's feeling about the meeting. Most of the time, men will respond with feelings of relief and with greater comfort in the group process. Facilitators should reinforce men's feelings of engagement and any comments that they've made that are pro-group or pro-change. Facilitators can also increase engagement by asking men to comment or commit on whether or not they're coming back next week by responding to the question, "Are you coming back next week?" If facilitators have spent the majority of group time dealing with hostility from one or two of the men, they may wish to ensure that these men check out last. Choose the seemingly most pro-group man first. He'll set a precedent for the others. If facilitators are very concerned that men will check out only with hostility and anger, they may wish to skip this exercise and work on a plan to address men's feeling during the next group. It is important to end this first group on a positive or neutral note. For example, facilitators may wish to reiterate the hope that each participant will find something useful in the weeks to come.